when my son announced his wedding. I thought I had raised a man who understood love, family, and respect. But on the day of the ceremony, I found myself seated in the kitchen between dirty dishes and the catering staff while strangers filled the front tables. I didn't cry, I didn't argue. I smiled, I watched, and by the end of the night, everything changed because I canceled everything they thought they had gained. Before we continue this story, make sure to subscribe and share your own story in the comments. Tell me where you're rewatching from. I also want to hear your story. Let's begin. It began on an ordinary Sunday morning. My son, Daniel, called me into the living room with a voice trembling between excitement and guilt. He said he had something important to share. His fiancée, Melissa, sat beside him, her hands perfectly folded on her lap, her smile rehearsed. When he said, "Mom, we're getting married," my heart skipped a beat. I smiled and hugged him. But even as I did, I caught the faintest flicker in Melissa's eyes, a look that measured me, not embraced me. That was the first shadow. In the following weeks, I noticed I wasn't included in much. Wedding plans arrived through second-hand conversations. The dress, the venue, the guest list all seemed to exist in a separate world. When I asked how I could help, Melissa said, "Don't worry, we've got it under control." I thought it was youth, independence. I gave them space, but a mother knows when something is shifting under the surface. One afternoon, I overheard her speaking to her friends on speakerphone, unaware that I stood by the hallway. She said, "I just don't want her involved too much. She has opinions." Her friends laughed. My son didn't speak up. I said nothing, but that sentence stayed with me. When the invitations went out, mine arrived later than others. No handwritten note, no warmth, just a printed card. My name misspelled. I told myself it didn't matter. It was his day, not mine. But that night, I couldn't sleep. There's a particular kind of silence that mothers know, the silence that follows realization. My son was slipping away, not because of love, but because of permission. He was being taught to forget who built him. The weeks passed quickly. Every visit grew shorter, every message more formal. I started noticing that when I called, Melissa often answered. "He's busy," she would say. Busy had become the new barrier between us. I decided I would attend the wedding quietly, gracefully. I would not cause a scene. I would not give anyone the satisfaction of labeling me the interfering mother. But the universe has a strange way of revealing truth when pride chooses silence. The wedding day arrived. The house was filled with perfume, chatter, and music. Everyone was dressed in gold and ivory. I wore pale blue, a color my son said reminded him of childhood summers. As I entered the venue, people smiled politely, but the smiles never reached their eyes. Then, the usher approached me. A young man, clearly uncomfortable, holding a folded seating chart. He said, "Mrs. Turner, your seat is this way." He led me past the decorated tables, past the laughter, through a swinging door into the kitchen. Steam rose from silver trays. Waiters hurried past with plates. He pointed to a small table near the corner. "This is your seat," he said softly, then left. I stood there, staring at the single chair covered in a white napkin. At that moment, every memory of sacrifice, every night I stayed awake during fevers, every meal I skipped so he could eat ran through me like film reels, snapping in my mind. But I didn't cry. I sat down. I smiled. When they toasted in the hall, I raised my glass of water. When the music played, I listened to the muffled rhythm through the kitchen walls. When they took photographs, I stayed where they placed me, behind the door, because I wanted them to believe I was broken. But I wasn't. That night, when the guests left and the lights dimmed, I made one phone call to the lawyer handling the house title and the trust fund. By morning, Daniel and Melissa's future would look very different. The wedding had ended. But the real story had just begun. I woke before dawn. The house was silent, the kind of silence that follows a storm, pretending it never happened. My hands were steady as I made coffee. I stared out the window and watched the world return to order, while mine quietly rearranged itself. The phone buzzed before 7. Daniel's name flashed on the screen. I let it ring. When the voicemail beeped, I listened. His tone was cautious. "Mom, about last night. I'm sorry if things felt different. It was Melissa's idea to seat the families separately. Please don't take it personally." His words tripped over themselves like a child explaining a lie he didn't craft but agreed to. I didn't reply. There are moments when silence says more than any sentence could. By mid-morning, my lawyer, Mr. Reeves, arrived. He had been with our family for decades. saw my late husband and me build everything we owned, from the ground up. He looked at me carefully, waiting for confirmation. I nodded once. That was enough. He opened his briefcase and began removing documents. The trust, the transfer papers, the property titles. I had planned to gift Daniel the lakeside house after the wedding, our family home, the one with the magnolia tree his father planted the day he was born. That plan was gone. Instead, I signed the documents that morning to redirect everything. The estate, savings, and inheritance, all reassigned to a scholarship foundation under my husband's name, for children with no one to fight for them. Children who would appreciate having a mother's love, even if it wasn't by blood. Mr. Reeves said nothing. He only watched me, understanding that grief had evolved into something sharper clarity. When he left, I sat in the stillness. I thought about Daniel as a boy, how he used to run to me after school, clutching his drawings, saying, "Look, Mom, I made this for you." Somewhere between that boy and the man at the altar, something broke. But it wasn't me who broke it. That evening, the newlyweds arrived at my door. I could hear their laughter before they knocked. I opened the door slowly. Melissa stood beside him in a silk dress, smiling a smile that didn't touch her eyes. She said, "We wanted to bring you some cake." Her voice carried politeness, not affection. I took the small box from her hands, placed it on the table without opening it. Daniel tried to start a conversation. He spoke of their honeymoon, the guests, the music. His words floated, searching for comfort, but there was none left to find. Finally, I looked at him and said, "I hope you remember who stood in the kitchen while you danced." He froze. Melissa's hand tightened around his arm. I saw in his face that he wanted to speak, to explain, but fear held him still. She spoke for him, like she always did. "You're overreacting," she said. "It was just a seating mistake." I smiled, a calm, measured smile. Of course, just a mistake. The next morning, they would learn what a real mistake costs, because by then, the bank would have received my instructions. Their joint account funded by what was meant to be their start would be frozen. The house keys they held would open nothing but memories. Every dream they built on my silence would dissolve quietly, like sugar in hot tea. And still, I didn't hate them. Hate is noisy. I preferred quiet correction. That night, I took out the photo albums. I ran my fingers over the old pictures, birthdays, school plays, the first bike ride. I didn't weep. I only whispered, "You chose to forget me, so I'll teach you how memory feels when it disappears." The next chapter of their life would begin in confusion. Mine would begin in peace. Because when a mother stops begging to be respected, her silence becomes her sharpest voice. And this was only the beginning of how everything unraveled. By the third morning, the storm had reached them. Melissa called first. Her voice, once polished with charm, cracked under pressure. "The bank says the funds are frozen. They said the authorization was revoked. What's going on?" I listened, said nothing. She mistook my silence for hesitation. "You can't do this," she snapped. "Daniel's your son." When I finally spoke, my voice was calm. A son who let his mother sit beside the kitchen sink at his own wedding. She hung up. Within an hour, Daniel arrived. His car screeched into the driveway, the same car I helped him buy when he got his first job. He didn't knock, just came straight in, face flushed, eyes wild. "Mom, what did you do?" "The lawyer says everything's been transferred." "You didn't even tell me." I looked at him, seeing not the boy I raised, but a man shaped by someone else's shadow. "I told you everything you needed to know when you walked past that kitchen door." He tried to argue, his words stumbling over desperation. He talked about fairness, about misunderstanding, about love, but every plea rang hollow, because love that forgets respect isn't love, it's convenience. When he realized I wouldn't yield, his voice broke. She said it was just a seat, just a mistake. "You're ruining everything over a chair." I stood. "That chair was where you left me. And that's where I decided you'd have to learn the cost of forgetting who lifted you high enough to stand." He left without another word. The next week was quiet. I knew pride would keep them away, but hunger would bring them back. Not hunger for money, but for stability, something Melissa didn't know how to build without someone else's foundation. By Friday, the calls stopped. The silence, this time, wasn't peace, it was waiting. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived, handwritten, Daniel's handwriting, the one I used to recognize instantly on school forms. He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He just wrote, "I didn't know she did that." I didn't see it until someone showed me the photographs. I should have looked for you. I read that line 3 times, then folded the letter and placed it in the drawer where I kept his childhood drawings, not as forgiveness, as evidence that somewhere, under her voice and his confusion, the boy still existed. But the world doesn't rewind. Melissa didn't take the loss quietly. Word spread through the family, stories twisted, truth diluted. They said I was bitter, vindictive, controlling. Some believed her, some didn't. I didn't correct anyone. The truth doesn't beg for believers. One night, I received another call, this time, from Mr. Reeves. She tried to contest the transfer, he said, claimed emotional distress. I almost laughed. She can have all the emotions she wants. The law belongs to discipline. He paused. You've always been precise, Mrs. Turner. Not precise, I said. Just done being invisible. That night, I sat outside beneath the magnolia tree, the same one my husband planted for our son. The blossoms were falling, soft and white, scattering across the soil like memories that refused to stay buried. I whispered to the air, he'll understand one day, when someone tries to sit him in the kitchen of his own life. The wind shifted, the petals moved. In that moment, I realized something simple but final. Sometimes, the greatest inheritance a mother can leave is not wealth, but the absence of comfort. Only then does a man learn what truly matters. When everything easy is gone, the story wasn't over. It had only turned a new page. 3 months passed. No calls, no visits. The silence had weight, now not tension, not resentment, but gravity. I carried it well. I went on with my routines. Morning walks, gardening, letters to no one in particular. The house was quieter, yet it finally felt mine again. Then, one morning, a knock, not hurried, not timid. 3 solid knocks. I opened the door. Daniel stood there, alone. No wedding ring, no smile, just the hollow expression that belonged to someone who had walked through fire and finally noticed who had handed him the matches. He said, "She left." I didn't invite him in. I stepped aside instead. He took it as permission. He sat at the same table where we once shared breakfast before school. His shoulders were slumped, his hands restless. I made coffee without speaking. When I placed the cup in front of him, he stared at it for a long time before saying, "I thought she loved me, but the moment the money was gone, so was she." I said nothing. He went on, words breaking between confession and realization. "She made me believe you were controlling, said you'd never let go. I didn't see what she was doing until the bills started piling up and she started blaming me for everything." His voice faltered. "You were right." I looked at him carefully. "No, Daniel, you were wrong. And that's what will save you if you let it." He blinked, confused. I continued, steady and low. "You mistook silence for surrender. You mistook kindness for weakness. You watched someone humiliate your mother and said nothing. That's not love. That's cowardice. And cowardice is what destroys a man faster than betrayal ever could." He didn't defend himself. He just lowered his head. The sound of his quiet breathing filled the space between us. When he finally spoke again, his voice was smaller. "Can I stay here for a while, just until I figure things out?" I nodded. "The guest room is clean. You'll work for what you use. Yard, repairs, groceries. No idle debt between us," he accepted. That was the first sign of change. The days grew into a strange rhythm. We didn't talk much. He rose early, helped around the house, and ate in silence. Slowly, the wall between us began to erode, not by words, but by presence. One evening, I found him sitting under the magnolia tree, staring at the fading sunset. He said, almost to himself, "I looked at those wedding photos again. You weren't in any of them. It looked wrong, like something was missing." I answered, "That's what happens when you erase your foundation. The house looks complete until the first storm comes." He nodded. There was no need for more. A week later, he told me he'd filed for annulment. He said it quietly, like a man closing a chapter that never should have been written. He didn't ask for approval. He didn't ask for help. He simply stated it. That was enough. Before he went to bed, he stopped at the door. "Mom, thank you for not shouting that day. I would have never heard you." When he left the room, I sat in the same chair where I'd once signed away his inheritance. I finally understood what that moment had bought: not revenge, not victory, but silence deep enough for truth to echo. In the end, I hadn't lost a son. I'd paused him, and now, he was starting to return, not as the boy I raised, but as the man he was supposed to be. But I knew this peace wouldn't last forever. The world has a way of testing rebirth, and another storm was already forming, one I could feel long before it arrived. The storm came quietly, as they often do. Not with thunder, but with an envelope. It arrived on a Thursday morning. No return address. My name written in a rushed, unfamiliar hand. I slid it open with the kitchen knife and pulled out a letter to pages, folded twice, faint traces of perfume that I remembered too well. Melissa. The words were sharp and pleading at once. She wrote that she was sorry, that she had made mistakes, said things she didn't mean. She spoke of confusion, of pressure, of wanting to make amends. She ended it with a single line: I didn't realize what kind of mother you were until I tried to become one myself. I read it twice, then once more, slower. My hands didn't tremble. Pity didn't come, only understanding, cold, factual, irreversible. Some people learn the value of roots only after the soil rejects them. Daniel found the letter later that day. I saw his eyes scan it, his expression tightening into something unreadable. He didn't speak, but that night, he sat at the table longer than usual, his untouched plate between us. Finally, he said, "She's pregnant." The words fell like stones in still water. He went on, "She wrote me last week too. Said she's keeping it. Said the child deserves a father." I looked at him. Not with anger, but with the kind of stillness that makes truth unavoidable. "And what do you plan to do?" "I don't know," he said. "Part of me wants to go. Part of me knows it would destroy me again." "Then decide which version of yourself you're willing to bury," I said, "because one of them will die no matter what you choose." He didn't answer. Days passed. He worked longer hours outside, barely spoke, ate little. I watched quietly. A mother learns the difference between intervening and allowing consequence to do its work. Then, one evening, I found him sitting in his car, engine off, staring at the road. In his lap, an ultrasound photo. He said, "She sent this. Said the baby has my eyes." I replied, "A child's eyes don't redeem the blindness of their parents." He looked broken. "But if it's mine, if it's yours," I said, "then you protect it. Not her, not the lie that birthed it. The child deserves a father, not another fool chasing forgiveness." He didn't move for a long time. Then he whispered, "I'm scared I'll become like her." "No," I said. "You already did once. Don't repeat it." The following week, he left town to meet her. He didn't say goodbye. I didn't stop him. Some lessons require the echo of old pain before they settle. The house returned to silence, but it wasn't the same silence as before. It carried anticipation, not absence. I knew he would return, changed or shattered. 2 weeks later, a message came late at night. 4 words. "You were right again. I didn't ask what happened. I didn't need to." The truth always returns home, wearing the face of regret. Outside, the magnolia tree was blooming again. I sat beneath it, listening to the wind. People think vengeance is loud. It isn't. True retribution is the quiet unfolding of truth at its own pace, methodical, patient, irreversible. And as the blossoms fell one by one, I realized the story hadn't been about punishment at all. It had always been about correction. But the next chapter would not belong to Daniel or Melissa. It would belong to the child. Neither of them was ready for the choice I knew I'd soon have to make. Winter came early that year. The air held a weight that reminded me of endings. The magnolia tree had gone bare. Daniel returned one morning without warning. His face carried the exhaustion of someone who had seen too much and understood too late. He said only 3 words. She had him. The silence that followed was long. I looked at him, and "She's gone," he said. "Left the baby with her mother. Said she couldn't do it. Said it reminded her of me." He looked at me then, eyes red, voice low. "He's my son, Mom." I nodded once. "Then go get him." He hesitated. "Her family won't let me." I stood. "Then we'll see about that." Within days, Mr. Reeves was back at my kitchen table. The papers were drawn. Custody petitions, affidavits, background records. The law, when guided by patience and preparation, bends to truth. Within weeks, the child, barely 3 months old, was placed under Daniel's care, supervised, temporary. But it was enough. When they brought him to the house, I saw him for the first time. Small, quiet, wrapped in a pale blue blanket. His eyes were dark and still, like the calm before rain. I didn't cry. I don't cry for beginnings. Daniel stood over the crib that night, silent. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "You learn," I answered, "the way I did." He nodded. Will you help me? Yes, I said. But not for you. For him. The child became the quiet pulse of the house. His breathing filled the empty corners that grief had hollowed out. Nights were long again, but this time, the sound of crying carried purpose. Weeks passed. Daniel softened. The man who once let others speak for him now spoke in whispers to his son, tracing small circles on his tiny hands. I watched, wordless, as the world repaired itself one heartbeat at a time. But redemption is never complete. It only balances what was broken. One afternoon, a car stopped outside. I recognized it immediately. Melissa stepped out thin, pale, holding nothing. She didn't knock. She just stood at the gate, eyes fixed on the window where I stood watching. Daniel saw her too. He froze, then opened the door halfway. She spoke quietly. I just wanted to see him, he said. You gave that right away. She cried quietly, not for effect this time. I didn't know how to love him. Daniel didn't answer. He closed the door. The latch clicked like punctuation on a sentence that no longer required words. I looked at him. He whispered, that was the last piece, wasn't it? Yes, I said. Now you can start. That night, I sat by the crib. The baby stirred, his small hands twitching in sleep. I thought of the kitchen at the wedding, of the humiliation that had started this chain of events, of how every act of cruelty has its echo. This small, breathing child was the final echo. The proof that something can still grow from broken things, if guided correctly. I leaned closer, whispered to him, you won't forget where you come from. Outside, the first snow began to fall. Soft, steady, unbothered by the past. And for the first time in years, I felt no anger, no grief-only brown hair. Spring returned with rain. The magnolia tree bloomed again, full and heavy. The air in the house had changed. It no longer carried tension. It carried rhythm, breathing, movement, life. Daniel had settled into fatherhood. His mornings began with lullabies instead of alarms. His nights ended not in noise, but in quiet responsibility. The boy was named Samuel. The name had been my husband's choice for a son we never had the chance to raise. Now it had come home, but peace rarely survives unchallenged. It was late afternoon when the knock came. I opened the door to find two men in dark coats. One handed me an envelope. Mrs. Turner, you've been served. Inside, a petition, custody dispute, filed by Melissa Bafta backed by her new partner. They were demanding joint custody, citing emotional instability on Daniel's part and unfit influence from me. I folded the paper once. Understood, I said, and shut the door. Daniel was in the yard. When I told him, he froze. Fists clenched, jaw trembling. She's doing this because she lost control, he said. I nodded. Then show her what control looks like. We prepared. Mr. Reeves built the case quietly, methodically. Every record, every exchange, every hospital visit, every absence documented. I kept the house immaculate. Every detail mattered. The world respects order, not outrage. The day of the hearing, the courtroom was cold. Melissa sat across the aisle, her eyes hollow, makeup perfect, voice trembling with well-practiced fragility. She spoke of isolation, of regret, of wanting her son to know both parents. Then they called me. I didn't speak like a mother defending her son. I spoke like a witness describing facts. I told them about the wedding, the kitchen, the years of silence, the sudden reversal when the money vanished. I ended simply. A woman who cannot respect the roots that raised her husband, cannot raise the child who carries his blood. No theatrics, no anger, just precision. When the judge asked if I sought any personal claim, I said, none. My claim is legacy, not possession. The courtroom fell silent. Melissa looked away. The ruling came a week later. Full custody to Daniel. Limited visitation rights for her, pending review. When the papers arrived, Daniel sat down beside me, staring at the signature. It's over, he said. No, I replied. It's begun. This time correctly. Months passed. Samuel grew stronger, louder, alive. The house was no longer haunted by what had been lost, but by what had finally been reclaimed. One evening, I found Daniel in the garden, holding his son beneath the magnolia blossoms. He looked up and said, I think he's starting to recognize faces. Then make sure he never forgets yours, I said. He smiled faintly. And yours? He won't need to remember mine, I answered. He'll see it every time you choose dignity over silence. As the sun set, I looked at the two of them, the man and the child, both born twice. The air smelled of renewal. I thought of the wedding, of the kitchen, of the night I smiled through humiliation. Everything that followed had not been revenge. It had been correction through consequence. When people ask what I gained, I answer, nothing. That's the point. A mother doesn't need victory. She needs restoration. And, as the magnolia petals fell around us, I knew restoration had finally come. The story ended where it began, with a mother watching quietly from the corner of a room. Only this time, she wasn't hidden. She was home.